Welcome back. I'm Speed, not at the bottom of the helix today. We're waiting here for the Austin train show to open up so I can go in and buy a few things and maybe give a clinic or two. Our next presenter has been a model railroader since the early 1970s, but has enjoyed prototype modeling since 2000. His interests are focused on research and modeling railroads, industry, and the urban environment of the mid-1920s. He once owned a record store for 13 years and has hosted numerous radio shows with a focus on many types of music. Please welcome the worldwide famous Eric Hansmann.
Well, thank you. I wasn't expecting worldwide famous there. Thank you. And welcome everyone to another fun-filled NMRAx clinic. Many thanks to Speed for inviting me today. I've got quite a few examples here for backdating plastic freight car models, and they are all HO scale models, as that's what I work in, HO scale. Some of these are similar to other models available in other scales. So let's get going here. And yeah, I know this seems like an odd question. And you know, I've heard the reactions from so many people. Why would we even want to think about doing such a thing? Well, first off, there are many HO scale plastic models representing freight cars that are built in the teens and 20s. And it's easier now to model a moment from a century ago. The models will all need some work to best reflect the period practices. And secondly, if you model before 1953, these same freight cars might need similar updates, because many of those freight cars that were built in the teens and the 20s, they survived in operation and service into the late 40s and very early 50s, and some even beyond that. So let's take a look at a few. Now these boxcars were not USRA car designs. This Acura model actually is similar to Canadian prototypes that were built just before and after World War I. These reefers follow Fruit Grower Express prototypes and a few others that were built in the early 20s. There were 25,000 USRA double-sheet boxcars built in 1919 and assigned to 24 railroads. There's another single-sheet boxcar that has similarities with Illinois Central and Milwaukee prototypes. There are other manufacturers producing models of earlier prototypes too, not just Acura. For instance, this Bowser Pennsylvania Railroad GS class all-steel gondola follows a design originally built in 1903. People often are amazed when I tell them that there were about 20,000 of these built, and many of them operated into the 50s and beyond in maintenance way service. Walthers produced the USRA 70-ton Milgon. 5,000 of these were built and assigned to 5 railroads in 1919, and through the 20s, thousands of near copies were built for the New York Central lines, the Reading, and the B&O. These are just a handful of plastic models that are available that can be used, that reflect prototypes from the teens and 20s that can be used on your layouts. Regulations spurred many changes on our prototypes. These 5 AAR regulations are key to understanding details for upgrading the models. All these models, they come with AB brake systems, all right? If we go to the bottom here, one of the first regulations was AB brakes required on all newly built freight cars starting in 1933, late 1933. That's just for newly built. This was the Depression. If you look through some of the build records of the 30s, new car construction went way down. Many railroads often rebuilt what they had. So in 1937, the AAR required that AB brakes be installed on all newly rebuilt freight cars, because they wanted to change out of the K-brake system, all right? And then we had the arch bar truck ban in July 1940. And this is another key date that I get asked about this a lot. When were Arch Bar trucks banned? That's the date right there, July 1st, 1940. And then we have another date toward the end of World War II where wood running boards were outlawed on new cars. So after this point, new cars would have steel running boards like Apex or Morton style running boards on boxcars and covered hoppers because they were a new freight car at that time. And then the big one here, January 1st, 54, all K-brake systems, all cars with K-brake systems were banned from interchange. That was the drop-dead date. Many of these dates, some of these dates have been pushed back many times, especially the Arch Bar truck ban and the K-brake ban. They were pushed back many times over the years for railroads to catch up, basically. Because these fleets were huge. You know, you just don't modify 20,000 cars like that. It takes a lot of time. And they needed time in order to upgrade and make the changes to the brake systems and such. Here's one of my favorite resources for inspiration. This is a great book published by the NMRA, and it's been reprinted a few times now. It features photos from the Robert Charles collection, and most of those photos were taken between 1945 and 1948. So there's quite a few older freight cars that are featured, and many of them actually have the earlier K-brake system components. A lot of the old freight cars, they were put into service for the war demands. You know, the railroads were stressed in order to meet the demands of the wartime effort. So there's 350 freight car images in this book. And yes, I took the time to tally up and make my own spreadsheet in order to share with you what I saw, what I found. So there's the different types of cars and what I found for the different years from photos just in this book. And these are only the photos where I could really tell that there was a K-brake system on the car. In some of the photos, I really couldn't discern that. So let's take a look at a few cars here, a few prototypes. Here's an Illinois Central boxcar from the Charles collection. We can see the K-brake system right here in the center of the car under the door. It's not three components like the AB system. This is just one component. The K-brake system, this is K-connected, where the brake cylinder was connected to the air reservoir, and at the other end of the air reservoir was the valve, the operating valve. There was a different version too, and we'll get to that. Pennsylvania Railroad, their X-29 boxcar fleet, most of their cars were built in the 20s, so they originally had K-brakes. Many of them had K disconnected. That's KD, otherwise known as split K brake systems, where the air reservoir and valve were separate from the brake cylinder. The brake cylinder is actually on the other side of this unit right here. And we'll see an example on a model coming up here soon. So that's two different types of K-brake systems that were used. And the split K-brake, they were very important, very common on gondolas that had drop doors, and also on hoppers, because you had very little space at the end of the hopper underneath the slope sheets for the brake components. Here's another photo here where we see the K-brake system, a K-connected system under this PFE reefer. You also see a new stencil for a new weight date, and we'll get into that here soon too. Another interesting detail for these earlier cars, the second grab iron wasn't required until 32, 33, right around that period. We see it here on the Penzi car. It's been upgraded with a new door and the grab iron, but not the new brakes, compared to this PFE car where we have the K-brakes and the original single grab above the left sill step. Tank cars had a lot of many of these had K-brake systems, and they're very visible because of how well we can see under the car. A lot of them stand out. Some of them had the split K system too. Here's one of my favorite photos for weathering. This is Jack Delano photo from the Library of Congress. The Library of Congress site, loc.gov. It's a treasure trove of great photos and information. And these photos you can download as large TIFF files. So you can zoom in to review all the details. And that's what I recommend, downloading the large TIFF file for your archive so that you can refer to it easily. Because sometimes it's a little difficult to find that needle in the Library of Congress haystack. So download good quality for your own archive so it's easy to find. We have a B&O M26A class boxcar right here in the foreground. We're going to take a look at that. See, we can zoom in very easily on these large photos. I did a little tweaking of this in Photoshop so that we could see it pretty clearly. And it's got part of the K-brake system right down here. It also still has one handhold, one grab iron here above the left sill step, and it's got the original door. This is 1943, and I think it's in the original lettering. There's no B&O dome, no B&O herald over here on the right, and this is how the lettering was originally applied, the data presentation, when it was built in 26 or early 27. So this looks like it's a car that is in its original paint and lettering still, although very, very well worn. And here's your Illinois Central gun that was right beside it. We can easily see the silhouette of the K-connected brake system underneath this gondola. And it's pretty beat up. Although it's got the second grab on the left, it needs a little repair work done for this grab iron up here, and also the wood that's failing on the interior there. So I like to allow the prototype to guide my work with detailing and weathering models. So what do we do to our models? Here's some of the steps that I take. In many cases, Andrew's trucks would be used to replace whatever comes with the model. It's very easy to remove the one grab iron on the left side, and then, usually I replace the brake systems too. Here are a pair of Acura models that are pretty easy to upgrade. Both of them are in factory lettered, still with the factory lettering on it. But I removed the upper grab here on the Atlantic Coastline car. You can still see a ghost of it there. I also changed out the trucks and a couple other things too, and we'll get to that. On the Western Maryland car, I removed both grabs on the left and replaced one with a wire grab, and also replaced the trucks. So changing out the brake hardware is actually pretty easy. The lower car here, the underframe hasn't been updated yet. The underframe on all the Acura wood sheath box cars, whether it's the outside braced or the double sheath car, they're the same underframe. So it's the same processes that you would need to follow to upgrade either one. And basically, I fill in the holes where the air reservoir and the triple valve for the AB brake components go. I fill those in with some melted sprue material. Just melt a little sprue, pop it in there while it's still kind of plastic liquidy, and then let it dry and hit it with some plastic cement too. Now what's fascinating is that the application of the updated AB brake components is in the same spot as where the K-brake was mounted. So the brake cylinder pad stays the same, and you could just mount your Tichy brake casting right on top of it. Now I also added some of the brake levers and brake rods on the upper model here. And let's see, on the Western Maryland, not on this one. So, the underframe upgrades really aren't that difficult. And once you do a couple, they really become pretty easy. And the nice thing about the K-brake system is, if I were going to detail the AB system here, there's a pipe that runs from the brake cylinder to the triple valve, and also two pipes that run from the triple valve over to the air cylinder. The K brake system, at least the connected version, you don't have to worry about that kind of piping to connect the parts. Here's a modified Accurel underframe. I replaced the fish belly undersill with just some evergreen styrene, and added the K brake system. I also added the brake hangers, brake levers, and the air line that feeds to the brake cylinder, the brake components. Also on this Western Maryland car, I changed out the sill steps with A-line metal components. So, even if you go this far, once you start doing a few of these things, a lot of it falls right into place. And brake hangers, one of the great things about a lot of the brake hangers is that you can use 18-inch straight grabs for your brake hangers. So you don't even have to worry about, making exact brake hangers each time you want to install that. The Walthers USRA mill gun can also be backdated pretty easily. The KD brake system is the one major change. Now these models originally came with separate grab irons to install, and I haven't touched up the one up here yet. You can see basically, a lot of people don't like installing grab irons because there's so many. Well, on these mill guns, there's 8. There's 2 on each end, 2 on each side, and that's all you have to worry about installing. It's pretty easy. It's a good car to work on for your own upgrading skills. You need to change out the original trucks, and these are Accurel Andrews trucks, which actually better represent the 70-ton version of the Andrews trucks. The underframe details, this is how it comes right out of the box here with the AB system components. I just took a sharp blade and removed the air cylinder and the triple valve, and I also removed the brake cylinder on this one too, but I kept the platform there and put in the Tichy components and also some rods and some levers in order to reflect what was on the prototype. Again, this is a pretty simple upgrade if you want to backdate a USRA mill gun to an appearance that would probably be proper through World War II. The Bowser, Pennsylvania GS gun on the bottom would also need backdating because, as the originals were built in 1903 with K brakes. Up above here, we've got a Finero and Camerlengo resin kit that is the same, that follows the same prototype. It's got the split K brake system here, as well as the Pennsy went a little complex on their brake levers here, so it's a little different from what you see on some other prototypes. I've yet to upgrade a Bowser model yet, so I can't show you an upgraded plastic one, but I will be following pretty much the same thing as what you see on the resin kit at the top. So the Bowser kits and the ready-to-run cars that they produce now, they would have the AB brake components on these pads. And the KD brake system, that's still the major change to these cars. So I've mentioned using the Tichy brake components, and they make both. They make the KC, K-connected brake component, as well as the KD disconnected or split K brake component. But it's also easy to make the split K out of the single casting. I just use a very sharp blade to cut carefully along this line. This is the where the air reservoir is connected to the brake cylinder as it is, and just carefully keep scoring a little bit as I slowly turn the casting, and careful not to bend the delicate piping parts on the back side here. So you can make your own as well. It's available either way through a Tichy train group, or you could, just get the one. Sometimes modelers just give me their spare parts because they don't use K-brakes. And I tell them, are you sure you want to do this? Because, you really can use it. They're like, no, I don't need it. So I get some extra brake parts in the long run. So the KC, the KD, the disconnected, they're very helpful for working on hoppers because hopper cars had the two components, mainly because there wasn't that much room deep under the slope sheet there. And here we have a Bowser GLA frame, and I've already installed a styrene pad here for the brake cylinder to go onto. And then the air reservoir is basically hung by a metal strap. It's not really connected to the frame directly, but the strap is how it's actually mounted onto the frame. The hoppers that are available, like the AccuRail USRA hopper and the Bowser GLA and H-class models, they all have AB brake components. And if you really want to do this, they need to be changed out to the KD system. And both parts are mounted on the one end of the car. So it's really pretty easy. Once you start doing some of this, it falls into place. I originally used another piece of wire to join the brake cylinder and the air reservoir. I had to make this little bend because there's a post that comes down right here from the slope sheet. So I had to get around that. Here they are in place. Installation went pretty quickly. I trimmed the excess plastic, of course, after snapping the photograph. There are a couple. The one from the previous image, and then the next one I did. And I decided, since the connection back here is way back in the dark, that I really didn't need to fuss over that and install it. So on many of my hoppers, I haven't installed that extra detail that's deep in the recesses underneath the slope sheet. And yes, of course, I would trim the excess styrene here from the strap. But that's basically how these parts were mounted on hopper cars. Here are the AccuRail mounts, and one thing I found was that the USRA hoppers, the brake cylinder was mounted differently than on the previous, on the GLA cars. It's mounted with the cylinder pointing toward the center of the car compared to the cylinder pointing toward the end sill of the car. So I had to figure out how to do that. And since it was going to be visible, I also included the airline connection to the back of the brake cylinder, but I just had it end back here at the slope sheet support. I didn't bother connecting it to the air cylinder. And I will point out one thing I did wrong here. I mounted the air cylinder upside down. We all make mistakes, right? That's how we learn. Here, these are mounted correctly, and these are incorrectly done. So I think I just left them be because they're really hard to notice. But I know it's there, and on subsequent models, I have updated my methods. Now, coal hoppers wore out quickly, and they were frequently rebuilt. Remember those regulation dates we were talking about? After January 1st, 1937, AB brakes were required on all newly rebuilt cars. So if you're modeling the late 40s, even some of the early 40s, I don't think you would need to worry about backdating too many hoppers. They took a beating, especially in coal service. Wet coal creates a little bit of acid that starts making the steel rust out. So cars were frequently rebuilt with new side sheets, and that's a pretty considerable rebuild. So they'd be getting new brakes after 1937. So if you're modeling the 1920 to 1940 span, well, maybe the brake updates are what you want to consider. Here's an Acura hopper, pretty much completed with the updates. I also added a train line along the side. Let's see the brake cylinder mounted, pointing toward the center of the car. And again, here we have a USRA, Acura USRA car, and a Bowser GLA car, and the upgrades that I did for both. And again, I followed prototype photos. I let the prototype be my guide on a lot of this. So, you know, the brake cylinder, I've even got the brake lever under here. The Buffalo Creek and Gawley cars had a different kind of ladder than on other GLA hoppers or other early hoppers of that era. And so I did that too. And with the Acura car, I removed the visible plastic grab holds or hand holds, grab irons and hand holds, and replaced those with wire, as I did on the Bowser GLA hopper too. Many tank cars that were built in the teens and through the 20s, they'd all have K-brake systems, and many of them kept those into the 50s. Here's a great example. This is a builder's photo where we can see the K-brake system very clearly hanging off the center sill on this Roxana Petroleum car. And I say Roxana Petroleum, you see Shell, but the reporting marks were for the parent company, Roxana Petroleum. Shell was the brand name for their product. Now, many of these, this represents a AC&F Type 21 tank car, and Proto 2000 produced these in HO scale. So this is something where there's plenty of models out there, and if you want to backdate it, it's a pretty easy process. Here's my model with the original AB brakes installed. So we've got to remove a couple parts and then put in replacements. There's a close-up of the prototype photo. Notice this kind of hangs off of components that are attached to the center sill. It's not hanging off the bottom of the center sill, but there's like a wedge-shaped piece here and then an arm back here that the brake components are attached to on the prototype. And here's the Tichy casting installed in place. Remember, brake cylinder, air reservoir, and then the control valve back here. So this is a K-connected brake component. It fits easily in that space. And pretty visible, even though, you know, it's not painted in this photo here. Once it's painted, once this car is weathered, you know, a lot of dust kicks up under here. So you would have, you'd be able to see that brake component pretty clearly on your layout. Another thing, many tank cars had arch bar trucks through the 20s too, and some had Andrews trucks. So refer to your photographs to make sure, you know, to help that guide your work. That's something I always recommend to people. Use the prototype photos, let that guide your work. So everything we've covered so far has focused on physical hardware changes for our models in order to reflect the prototypes well. Another element to consider is the weigh data lettering. Freight cars were frequently weighed and the updated information stenciled accordingly. The journal boxes also, they were repacked annually, if not more frequently, and a stencil was applied above the right truck with those details. When I do these changes, I try to pick a new weigh date within a couple years before my modeling focus. This is also a way to see what date of some of the photos you're looking at are, the prototype photos. If it's got the weigh date can tell you that the photo was taken sometime in the months right before, right after that weigh date, but yet not too far out in time because it would need to be reweighed again. So freight car lettering is really a detail that stands out on many of our models. New cars, they're painted, stenciled, and then lightweighted. This one hasn't been weighted yet because the weight hasn't been stenciled. Once the work is done, this goes to the scale, it's weighted, and it's then the information, the data is added here, along with the month added to the weigh date. So on your data, you're going to have your weights. Later on, this is lightweight, and we'll see that in a moment. You're going to have your weigh location, and then the weigh date. A lot of people confuse this with a rebuild date. That's not necessarily the same. It might be, but it doesn't. There's not a direct correlation. And we'll go over some of that too. So the great 1925 image from the Reading Railroad magazine. Remember this car from earlier? It's a great example of a freshly painted area in order to apply a new weight stencil. So the load limit, if it changes, or the lightweight, if the lightweight changes, the load limit changes too. When you add up these two numbers, it equals the capacity for the journals of the truck of this car. It doesn't equal the capacity up here. It equals what the journals have a capacity for. That's a very, very important issue. A lot of people think these two numbers equal the capacity of the car, and that's wrong. At the far end, there's also another paint out, and that's where the repack data was, the repack stencil goes. So how frequently were these cars reweighed? And there's data for this. It's published. It's published in almost every official railway equipment register. That's ORER. They're in the Code of Service Rules. And this is what I found in a 1943 ORER, which the NMRA has republished. That they may have copies in their company store. I haven't looked lately. They also republished, I believe, in 1954 ORER too. And I find these volumes to be very, very handy to help my modeling. Since I focus on an earlier time, I also have the 1925 and 1926 versions, among others. So we just can see what the schedule is that the AAR has dictated for the car service rules. And this is how these cars needed to be reweighed periodically in order to follow the rules. And if the car was 300 pounds or more different from the previous light weighting, then you would have to change the light weight and the load limit stencils. All right. If it didn't change, all that would change is the place and the date for the reweigh. Refrigerator cars were a little different. They could vary by about 500 pounds or more. But everything was on a schedule. And you can see wood cars or cars with a lot of wood, they needed to be reweighed quicker after their build compared to the steel cars. That's because the wood would dry out and change the weight of the car. And this is important because railroads made money on shipping the weight of a load. Remember, they're in the business of making money. And they made money by the tare weight of what they were carrying. So the light weight of the car was always important. Here's what I did on a model. We saw this one earlier. This is a USRA boxcar, Mid-Atlantic coastline car. I painted a strip of decal paper. Whenever I decal cars, oftentimes there's a blank strip somewhere on the decal paper. I save that, I paint it with a brush or with my airbrush, some sort of car color, some basic color that I use for painting other cars, mineral brown, mineral red, whatever. And then I use that in order to cover some of the stenciling for an upgrade on the data here. And all this is factory applied. And the original had the original lettering on this car reflected a 1919 data when the prototype was built. I model 1926. So this car would have been reweighed at least twice before my focal point of modeling. So I redid this. I added first off, I applied some gloss with the brush over this area. And then I added the red decal, the paint decal. And then on top of that, I added the 100 here, the location, and then the date. And yes, the date I think is 2 decals. The 5 is separate. You don't always find decals that fit exactly what you want to model. So you've got to piece some things together. And that's what I did here. And yes, I know it looks sloppy, but when you start looking at prototype photos, especially the reweigh information, you're going to find stuff that looks like this. It's not a straight line. Not all of it was redone. Things were done quickly to get this car back on the road. So this is something to remember. And it's once you start doing some of this, it comes together pretty easily. And you got to do both sides of the car, of course. So here's the same car under different lighting and exposures. This is how I had the car originally after weathering it and getting it into service. Then I realized, oh, I got to change this because this is for the new moment when it was built in 1919. So I changed that out. I changed the weigh information with the decal work that we went over previously. And WX is Waycross, Georgia. Railroads had a number of different scales, and you would need to find what was common for your railroad, because in many cases, railroads weighed their own cars. Not all cases, but in many. So predominantly, an ACL car, you would need an ACL scale in order to put on the proper weigh location there. And here's another method that I use. This model is freshly painted, freshly decaled, represents a USRA boxcar. This is a Tichy HO scale model. And this was originally lettered for Pennsylvania lines. But in 1924, Pennsylvania Railroad reorganized and absorbed Pennsylvania lines. And they went around and started quickly painting out lines on their cars. They didn't do the whole road name. They just painted out lines in order to bring the focus just to the core corporation. So I decaled, you could probably just barely see the shadow of the decals under the tape. I decaled that and I put gloss coat over it, and then I applied the tape. And then I shot this with a flat coat and started weathering. Now, why would I do this stuff with tape? It's because I wanted some of the original paint to be showing through, and I wanted the original decals to be brighter than what you see on the rest of the car, which would make it seem like new stenciling applied over a paint out area. And that's what I did here. And then, with wood sheath cars, boards were oftentimes replaced too. That's why I did it on the door. And then representing the paint over the Pennsylvania lines, over the lines portion of the road name there. So I did that with tape. And this is Tamiya masking tape. It works really nice, easy to cut, and easy to apply. And just have to be very careful peeling it off so that you don't pull off the decals. You know, I did put a gloss coat over the decals before applying the tape. Of course, I let that dry, and that's key so that when you peel up the tape, you're not going to peel up the decals too. Here's an Accurel 36-foot boxcar with custom decals for mid-20s appearance. And I also covered the weigh data information with tape too. It's a little more subtle in this model than the Penzi car, but you can pretty well see that it stands out a little bit compared to the rest of the car. Here's a hopper. I did pretty much the same thing here, except I needed to add the LT stencil here for lightweight. And I did this because I've seen this on prototype photos. The AAR and the ARA started changing some of their lettering requirements in 1925. This was, they started requiring the lightweight out here in 1925, and in late 26, they started requiring things to be separated completely here with load limit added to the weigh data. So that's why this looks different from what you might be more accustomed to with later cars. I also added the repack stencil above the right truck here. And again, you know, I apply some gloss with a brush, let it dry, and then I can add the decal. Once that's dry, I go over it with some gloss again before hitting it with some flat and then adding some more weathering. Now, sometimes when a car is weighed offline, that company doesn't necessarily have the same color paint handy for the paint out. So it's a different color. And you see this a lot on some modern cars. But it was happening way back in the 20s and teens too. So this is just another little detail that you can add to give your model just a little bit extra right there. And again, I used the extra decal strip that had been painted mineral brown and applied that as a separate decal, and then the stencil decals over top for the location and the date, and of course the different weight. And in my earlier era, since they didn't have load limit stencil, I didn't have to worry about changing both those numbers on this car. So that's, you know, some of the key things for backdating some of your models, giving your models a little bit more personality and character. And a lot of it, you're basically following the prototype. It's one of those things that I always like to suggest is let the prototype be your guide. There are so many resources out there. The NMRA book is just one. Historical societies have published resources, lots of fleet books for their boxcars or hoppers. I know I've got books from the Western Maryland Historical Society and the B&O Historical Society that have a bunch of photos that I use for inspiration. There are many other online resources besides the Library of Congress too. The Barringer Library has a Flickr site that has thousands of photos. You could spend all week looking at photos on that site and still not see them all. There are ACNF builder photos there, as well as just tons of photos that were taken line side where you can see some freight cars and find some inspiration for your own work. So it's amazing. We have so much access now to all this stuff compared to when I started in 1970 as a modeler. It's right there, almost at your fingertips and easy to do. And as with many things with modeling, do an easy project first. Don't try something very difficult right off the bat. You'll get frustrated, you won't go back to it. Trust me, I've done that many times. Do something easy first 2-3 times, get accustomed to it as far as changing out the brake systems, things like that. Work on an Acura car, like I suggested. That's one of the easiest models to change. Share your work. That's a great way to learn too, and help others along. And always, always, always ask questions. I wouldn't be the modeler I am today if I didn't ask any questions along my journey. So I encourage you to do that too. And everything takes time. All these cars here that I built, they take time. Many of these updates, they're actually pretty easy. They go quickly, just need a little touch up, and then weathering in order to get the car back on the rails and into operation. So go for it. Try something different. And I think you'll enjoy things in the long run. So if you have any questions, get in touch with me. My email address is right there. I also have a blog with regular postings noted here at the bottom. And I hope you visit and learn something interesting. I've been doing that since 2010. And try to do at least 1 or 2 posts a month with something that I hope you find interesting. Thanks for the time. Thanks for the invite for NMRAx. And I guess it's question time, right, Speed?
Ready for some questions?
I am ready.
Let's start with the tough one first. For the paint out or patch, what is the weathering material and how is it sealed? And do you mask the patches to do them?
Well, as you saw with one of the boxcars, I decaled it first, and then after decaling, my steps for a freight car are paint, gloss, decal, gloss. And then after that, I'll apply the tape to whatever I want to protect. Then I do a flat coat, which gives the model tooth for weathering. I might weather some at that time or a lot before peeling away the tape to show that fresh stencil. Now, with cars where I do that after weathering, the paint patch represents like new paint. So I'll spot gloss with a brush and some gloss, let that dry, then apply the decal, the color decal, then the stencil decal, hit it again with gloss so that it blends right in. And then I'll probably put some flat over that, but I'll try not to weather that spot much at all.
Okay.
Most of the weathering may be on the car already. So I'm just very careful to not cover up what I don't want to cover up.
A quick question about the prototype. Why did they reweigh the cars and how much was the new number different?
Okay. As I mentioned, railroads made money by the weights of what they're carrying in the cars. So you take the light weight of the car, and then with many cars, especially hoppers, you weigh it after it's loaded, you subtract the light weight from that overall weight, and you have the amount that the car is carrying, and that's what you make money on. So a car needs to have a proper light weight in order to effectively make a proper dollar on it.
Correct.
So that's why they reweighed cars. And if a car is 300 pounds or more off of what the previous stencil is, then they would do the new stencil and add the new weight.
Okay.
They would adjust the light weight and the load limit to reflect the total that's allowed by the journals on the car.
But did they expect cars to change that much over time? I mean, were they losing metal or wheels or brake levers?
Maybe not the first couple of ways, maybe not the first one 30 months after they were built or 30 months after that. But after that, as a car ages, it may lose weight. It may also get new hardware, which would change the weight. Any sort of updates, as I mentioned, hopper cars, the side sheets, they wouldn't necessarily replace all the side sheets at once on some cars, just some of that. So that's new metal, compared to what they took off. So there might be a difference in the weight there too. It's about doing business.
Yes. You mentioned several different kinds of trucks and brakes. Have you modeled all of them?
I've modeled quite a few. I mainly do the K brake, whether it's connected or disconnected. There's a lot of trucks available now, and even more are coming available as 3D printed objects. So I use Andrews trucks and arch bar trucks predominantly. Where applicable to replicate what's underneath a prototype, I'll use Dolman 2-level trucks. There are some 40-ton trucks available through Tahoe Model Works that I use too. We tend to forget that a lot of boxcars built in the teens were only 40-ton capacity. So the truck would be a little bit different under those moving forward. So that's something that I pay attention to. I don't have a large layout. So the details I put into each car, they become very important to me.
Quick question here from Ralph. Why didn't they call them empty weight instead of lightweight, I guess?
I don't know. They've always been lightweight since the Master Car Builders Association, began requiring the lettering on the cars back before the ARA and the AAR were formed.
Cool. When you date your cars, do you heavily weather them to the proto photos?
I do, predominantly. I think for many of us, especially modeling the steam era, I don't think we weather our cars enough. Okay. Industrial cities were smoky. There was a lot of soot. There was coal burning in home furnaces as well as factories. There was coal burning in most steam locomotives, especially, in the Midwest and the East and the South. I lived in Nashville for several years, 5 years, and I saw photos of Nashville from the 30s and 40s, and it was a pretty smoky city. And we don't think of Nashville as a smoky city. When we say smoky city, we think of Pittsburgh. We think of Buffalo, Cleveland. We think of those cities there with major industries. But pollution was a problem all over America. And I don't think we represent that grit and soot as much as we should.
Okay, what would be the best resource for a newbie to learn about brakes? Where would you send someone like me?
Well, it depends on what you're modeling. What era you're modeling. Mainly what era. There are car builder dictionaries that have been published down through the years, and those are great resources. Someone gave me one from 1937 that is just a compendium of companies that are selling hardware, different kind of hardware, doors, brakes, latches, trucks, couplers, spring packages, bolsters, you name it. It's in those things. So a car builder dictionary, I think there was one from the 30s or 40s reprinted that comes up every now and then that's a little less pricey than a real one.
Okay, here's one. Tips on weathering wood, sided, or even older steel cars.
Oh, that's a whole nother clinic.
so let's hold that question then for the future clinic. How big is your mid-1920s freight car fleet, and how many are plastic kits?
I've got about 165 or 170 cars, and I'd say 65 to 70 are plastic kits or plastic ready to run.
Okay.
Yeah.
And last question, what is currently on your workbench?
I've been working on a Finero and Camerlengo Illinois Central single sheath, door and a half automobile boxcar. And I'm finishing up installing etched metal ladders on that so that it's ready for the paint shop.
Wow. Oh, I have a question. It looks like you install these plastic and copper things into a car, and then you go later and paint them. How do you get the paintbrush back in there, or do you paint them all with the same kind of paint, regardless of what kind of material it is?
I usually prime a car before putting the car color on it. So, and there's some things that I don't necessarily paint right away or install in the car before it goes to the paint shop. There are uncoupling levers that are different from some that are called Karmer levers.
Okay.
And I try to install those after a car is painted, and I'll paint those separately.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very, very much. That
Thank
was
you.
quite insightful, and maybe I'll attempt something like that soon.
You know where to find me.
Thank you, Eric.
Thanks, Speed.
Brad, back to you for our next clinic. Come after the break.